you. Right, so back then it was probably even a lot more so. Okay, so for a lower class woman, you did all of your own chores. You had a ton of kids. What if your kid got sick? Could you just take it to the health department if you couldn't afford to pay for a regular doctor and they would treat your child there? No, if your child got sick, what was a very likely sort of end to that sickness? Death, right, good. You know, if you got sick, if your husband died, what were your options for like collecting a pension or for, you know, going on welfare? Very limited. What were your opportunities to ascend beyond your position? If you were born poor, you pretty much remained what? Poor your entire life, right? There was a cycle of poverty. Does that cycle of poverty still exist in 2018 in our culture? Yes. So one of the things that's kind of eye-opening about reading literature from 120 years ago, when we think they were so like archaic in the fact they didn't have phones and they didn't have technology, but a lot of the cultural sort of norms of that time relating to class and the way people are discriminated against, unfortunately, like still exists today. And that's one reason why reading literature from the past is very eye-opening. So if you were born poor, you stayed poor. What would probably be the one thing that would allow you to ascend above poverty if you are a woman? If you were born marriage, you were born very, very pretty, and that's really it. It's the only thing that oftentimes didn't get you anywhere, but that would be the only option that you had. Currently today, does that still factor into people's like lifestyles? Yes, unfortunately so. Okay, so the middle class then and the middle class now is very what? Small. There was not much of a middle class. There was the very rich and there was the very poor. There wasn't much of a middle class at all back then or now. For an upper class woman, your life was better because you had people to do stuff for you. You didn't have to do anything. Like you had people that took care of your children, you had people that took care of your house, and your job was to do what? Not even raise the kids. Other people raised the kids. What did you organize and execute? Social functions. That was really, you know, the function of the upper class woman, and you were groomed from a young age, as you'll see in the story, to fulfill that role. If you were an upper class person in general, what were your views of the lower class? Were you equal to the lower class? No, they were almost viewed as like a subspecies. Does that mentality still exist in our culture today to a degree? Yes, unfortunately it does. They weren't expected to exhibit any sympathy or help beyond what was sort of easy for them in the upper class. So a lot of these sort of trends you'll see in the literature, and you kind of have to have that framework of the culture and the historical context in mind when you read stories from the past, even if their culture isn't that different from ours. So kind of armed with all of that, you know, it's much better to be a person, much less a female now, I think, than back then. And you'll see in this story sort of the contrast between the upper and the lower class, and how the protagonist, which is the main character in the story, is treated when she opposes the upper class views of how the lower class should be treated. So again, this is your copy to keep. This is the first story that we'll talk about this semester. It's gonna be on the test. Any story that we discuss is test material. So this little handout will be like your first part of the study guide that will accumulate as we get towards the end of the fiction unit. Okay? So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna have you guys listen to it, and then at your own pace, I'm gonna have you answer the questions. When you're done with them, I'm gonna take them from you. That way no one feels like rushed or idle when they're done, and we'll start Monday's class going over these questions. But remember also you have 2 stories, one to read for Monday and one to read for Tuesday. So if you need to get caught up over the weekend on that, awesome. If not, then you can do your weekend. We read a couple stories by Catherine Mansfield. She's really good in representing like both the upper class and lower class, like classes of that time period.
The gardener had been up since dawn, mowing the lawns and sweeping them. The Garden Party by Catherine Mansfield. Narration by Caden Von Clegg. And after all, the weather was ideal. They could not have had a more perfect day for a garden party if they had ordered it. Windless, warm, the sky without a cloud. Only the blue was veiled with a haze of light gold, as it is sometimes in early summer. The gardener had been up since dawn, mowing the lawns and sweeping them, until the grass and the dark flat rosettes where the daisy plants had been seemed to shine. As for the roses, you could not help feeling they understood that roses are the only flowers that impress people at garden parties, the only flowers that everybody is certain of knowing. Hundreds, yes, literally hundreds, had come out in a single night. The green bushes bowed down as though they had been visited by archangels. Breakfast was not yet over before men came to put up the marquee. Where do you want the marquee put, Mother? My dear child, it's no use asking me. I'm determined to leave everything to you children this year. Forget I am your mother. Treat me as an honored guest. But Meg could not possibly go and supervise the men. She had washed her hair before breakfast, and she sat drinking her coffee in a green turban with a dark wet curl stamped on each cheek. Josie, the butterfly, always came down in a silk petticoat and a kimono jacket. You'll have to go, Laura. You're the artistic one. Away Laura flew, still holding her piece of bread and butter. It's so delicious to have an excuse for eating out of doors, and besides, she loved to arrange things. She always felt she could do it so much better than anybody else. 4 men in their shirt sleeves stood grouped together on the garden path. They carried staves covered with rolls of canvas, and they had big tool bags slung on their backs. They looked impressive. Laura wished now that she had not got the bread and butter, but there was nowhere to put it, and she couldn't possibly throw it away. She blushed and tried to look severe, and even a little bit short-sighted as she came up to them. Good morning, she said, copying her mother's voice. But that sounded so fearfully affected that she was ashamed and stammered like a little girl. Oh, have you come? Is this about the marquee? That's right, miss, said the tallest of the men, a lanky, freckled fellow, and he shifted his tool bag, knocked back his straw hat, and smiled down at her. That's about it. His smile was so easy, so friendly, that Laura recovered. What nice eyes he had. Small, but such a dark blue. And now she looked at the others. They were smiling too. Cheer up, we won't bite, their smile seemed to say. How very nice workmen were. And what a beautiful morning. She mustn't mention the morning. She must be businesslike. The marquee. Well, what about the lily lawn? Would that do? And she pointed to the lily lawn with the hand that didn't hold the bread and butter. They turned. They stared in the direction. A little fat chap thrust out his underlip, and the tall fellow frowned. I don't fancy it, said he. Not conspicuous enough. You see, with a thing like a marquee, and he turned to Laura in his easy way, you want to put it somewhere where it'll give you a bang slap in the eye, if you follow me. Laura's upbringing made her wonder for a moment whether it was quite respectful of a workman to talk to her of bangs slapped in the eye, but she did quite follow him. A corner of the tennis court, she suggested, but the band's going to be in one corner. Going to have a band, are you? Said another of the workmen. He was pale. He had a haggard look as his dark eyes scanned the tennis court. What was he thinking? Only a very small band, said Laura gently. Perhaps he wouldn't mind so much if the band was quite small, but the tall fellow interrupted. Look here, miss, that's the place. Against those trees, over there. That'll do fine. Against the Caracas. Then the Caraca trees would be hidden, and they were so lovely, with their broad, gleaming leaves and their clusters of yellow fruit. They were like trees you imagined growing on a desert island, proud, solitary, lifting their leaves and fruits to the sun in a kind of silent splendor. Must they be hidden by a marquee? They must. Already the men had shouldered their staves and were making for the place. Only the tall fellow was left. He bent down, pinched a sprig of lavender, put his thumb and forefinger to his nose, and snuffed up the smell. When Laura saw that gesture, she forgot all about the Caracas in her wonder at him caring for things like that, caring for the smell of lavender. How many men that she knew would have done such a thing? Oh, how extraordinarily nice workmen were, she thought. Why couldn't she have workmen for friends, rather than the silly boys she danced with and who came to Sunday night supper? She would get on much better with men like these. It's all the fault, she decided, as the tall fellow drew something on the back of an envelope, something that was to be looped up or left to hang, of these absurd class distinctions. Well, for her part, she didn't feel them. Not a bit, not an atom. And now there came the chock-chock of wooden hammers. Someone whistled. Someone sang out, "Are you right there, matey? Matey!" The friendliness of it, just to prove how happy she was, just to show the tall fellow how at home she felt, and how she despised stupid conventions, Laura took a big bite of her bread and butter as she stared at the little drawing. She felt just like a work girl. "Laura! Laura, where are you? Telephone, Laura!" a voice cried from the house. "Coming!" Away she skimmed, over the lawn, up the path, up the steps, across the veranda, and into the porch. In the hall, her father and Laurie were brushing their hats, ready to go to the office. "I say, Laura," said Laurie very fast, "you might just give a squeeze at my coat before this afternoon. See if it wants pressing." "I will," said she. Suddenly she couldn't stop herself. She ran at Laurie and gave him a small, quick squeeze. "Oh, I do love parties, don't you?" "Rather," said Laurie's warm, boyish voice, and he squeezed his sister too and gave her a gentle push. "Dash off to the telephone, old girl." Yes, oh yes. Kitty? Good morning, dear. Come to lunch? Do, dear. Delighted, of course. It will only be a very scratch meal, just the sandwich crusts and broken meringue shells and what's left over. Yes, isn't it a perfect morning? You're white? Oh, I certainly should. One moment, hold the line. Mother's calling. And Laura sat back. What, Mother? Can't hear. Mrs. Sheridan's voice floated down the stairs. Tell her to wear that sweet hat she had on last Sunday. Mother says you're to wear that sweet hat you had on last Sunday. Good. 1 o'clock. Bye-bye. Laura put back the receiver, flung her arms over her head, took a deep breath, stretched, and let them fall. She sighed. And the moment after the sigh, she sat up quickly. She was still listening. All the doors in the house seemed to be open. The house was alive with soft, quick steps and running voices. The green baize door that led to the kitchen regions swung open and shut with a muffled thud. And now there came a long, chuckling, absurd sound. It was the heavy piano being moved on its stiff casters. But the air, if you stopped to notice, was the air always like this? Little faint winds were playing chase, in at the tops of the windows, out at the doors. And there were 2 tiny spots of sun, one on the inkpot, one on a silver photograph frame, playing too. Darling little spots, especially the one on the inkpot lid. It was quite warm. A warm little silver star. She could have kissed it. The front doorbell pealed, and there sounded the rustle of Sadie's print skirt on the stairs. A man's voice murmured. Sadie answered, careless. I'm sure I don't know. Wait, I'll ask Mrs. Sheridan. What is it, Sadie? Laura came into the hall. It's the florist, Miss Laura. It was indeed. There, just inside the door, stood a wide, shallow tray full of pots of pink lilies. No other kind. Nothing but lilies, canna lilies, big pink flowers, wide open, radiant, almost frighteningly alive on bright crimson stems. Oh, Sadie, said Laura, and the sound was like a little moan. She crouched down as if to warm herself at that blaze of lilies. She felt they were in her fingers, on her lips, growing in her breast. It's some mistake, she said faintly. Nobody ever ordered so many. Sadie, go and find Mother. But at that moment, Mrs. Sheridan joined them. It's quite right, she said calmly. Yes, I ordered them. Aren't they lovely? She pressed Laura's arm. I was passing the shop yesterday, and I saw them in the window, and I suddenly thought, for once in my life, I shall have enough canna lilies. The garden party will be a good excuse. But I thought you said you didn't mean to interfere, said Laura. Sadie had gone. The florist's man was still outside at his van. She put her arm round her mother's neck, and gently, very gently, she bit her mother's ear. My darling child, you wouldn't like a logical mother, would you? Don't do that. Here's the man. He carried more lilies still, another whole tray. Bank them up just inside the door on both sides of the porch, please, said Mrs. Sheridan. Don't you agree, Laura? Oh, I do, Mother.